Welcome everyone to the UFCW United webinar, which is about the Kroger and Albertsons merger. We will be starting momentarily. I see folks are coming in right now. Participants are joining the webinar as we speak, and we'll be starting in just about 1 minute as folks come into the room. Once again, welcome to the UFCW United webinar about the Kroger-Albertsons merger. We now have hundreds of people who are already in. It's a little bit faster than joining a physical room, but it still takes time for everyone to get into the webinar room. And so we'll be starting in just 1 or 2 minutes. While we wait for the webinar to begin, we have a nice slideshow of different actions that we've taken and all the things that have already happened around the Kroger-Albertsons merger from this coalition and many other unions around the country who have been helping to fight this merger. I see we have over 500 people now in the webinar, and we're going to wait just a minute or two more before we get started. We see folks are still joining. We're going to wait just another minute or two as folks come into the webinar, and it's 5:01 right now. We're going to get started in just maybe 30 more seconds as people come in. I want to make sure that no one's stuck in a waiting room or for the connection to start, but folks are joined by hundreds of other UFCW members around the country for this webinar this evening about the Kroger-Albertsons merger, and thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. 1 more minute. All right, folks, we're going to go ahead and get started. I see people are still coming in, but I think that'll just happen throughout the beginning of the call. My name is Joe Mizrahi. I'm the Secretary Treasurer of UFCW 3000, and welcome to the UFCW United webinar around the Kroger-Albertsons merger. There are hundreds and hundreds of UFCW members and folks from around the country. This may be the biggest webinar in the UFCW history. We're very excited to have folks joining us. A few housekeeping things. This webinar is being recorded. Folks should have heard a prompt when they came in, but I want to make sure that everyone understands that we'll be recording the webinar this evening. And secondly, this webinar will be translated from English into Spanish. And before we begin, I'd like to have Joseph here start a short video about how that translation service works.
Para poder ingresar a la traducción en español y unirse a nosotros en su teléfono móvil, haga clic donde dice More en la parte inferior de la pantalla. Una vez que haga clic en More, aparecerá una pantalla con un botón para hacer clic que diga Language Interpretation. La siguiente pantalla tendrá la opción Español. Haga clic en Español y luego escuchará la traducción. Gracias.
Thank you. Okay, I see even more people have come in. So once again, welcome to the UFCW United webinar presented by a coalition of UFCW locals. I will be your moderator tonight. My name is Joe Mizrahi with UFCW 3000. I want to introduce the folks on the call. We have Mike Hines, the president of 367 in Washington State, Kathy Finn, the president of 775 in Southern California, Kim Cordova, the president of Local 7 in Colorado, Faye Gunther, the president of UFCW 3000 in Washington. We also have Todd Crosby, who's helping coordinate the campaign here. We have Andrea Zinder, the president of 324 in Southern California. And we have John Marshall, a capital strategist who will be doing some of the presentation tonight. We also have Mark Federici with Local 400 out in the DC area, and we have John Fromm with Local 5 in Northern California. So we have a full panel of folks. I know we have members of every local that I listed, and we welcome everyone tonight. You know, these webinars are always more fun if people participate, and this is going to be an interactive webinar. On your screen, if you're on a computer, at the bottom of your screen, you can see the words Q&A. If you click on that and type in a question, we will get to those questions later on in the call, and we're going to answer every question. We may not answer everything live on the call, but we'll definitely get to everything later if we don't talk about it on the call tonight. If you're on a phone or a tablet, you can hit the More button, which has 3 dots, and you can see the words Q&A there and ask your question there. So with all that housekeeping out of the way, I'm going to turn it over to Andrea Zinder, the president of UFCW 324.
Thank you, Joe. Welcome to the UFCW United webinar, and thank you for joining us here today. It's crucial that we have the participation of our members in this fight. On October 13th, it was announced that Kroger and Albertsons would pursue a $24.6 billion mega merger, joining together 2 of the largest grocery chains in the United States. From the first moment the proposed merger was announced, a coalition of UFCW and Teamster locals convened, gathered information, and took quick, decisive action. We have been clear from the outset, this deal will be harmful to workers, customers, and communities. It will lead to store closures, the loss of good union jobs, and higher food prices. The merger also poses a huge threat to farm producers and other suppliers, as well as smaller independent grocers. Our members and the communities we serve came together to voice strong opposition to the proposed merger. We took legal action to oppose Cerberus and the other private equity investors from gutting the company of $4 billion that your labor produced. Through a lot of hard work and help from elected allies in the state of Washington, we were able to delay the payout for several months. But in the end, the Superior Court judge in King County, Washington ruled in Albertsons' favor. And 2 weeks ago, the Supreme Court declined to review the case, clearing the way for Albertsons to pay the $4 billion dividend ahead of its proposed deal with Kroger. However, during the process, both companies were forced to disclose high-level information, which will help us in our fight to oppose the merger with federal regulators and truthfully inform the public of the devastating effects of the merger on local communities. Our coalition has sent letters to the Federal Trade Commission calling on regulators to block the merger, and members spoke out at an open meeting last month, helping the Federal Trade Commission see the human side of this merger. We also sent a delegation of grocery workers and union leaders to Washington, D.C. to hold a press conference and attend the U.S. Senate Antitrust Subcommittee hearing to scrutinize the proposed Kroger-Albertsons mega merger. The grocery workers got to meet with legislators, including Senators Amy Klobuchar and Bernie Sanders, where they told our elected officials their stories and concerns about how they will be impacted by this merger. It's important to know that at the U.S. Senate and in the Superior Court hearings in the state of Washington, the executives of both companies committed on record that they would not close stores and that they would continue to make needed investments in the stores and into wages and benefits of our members. However, we all know that these verbal commitments are only as binding as our ability to hold them accountable. Coming together to act, both grocery workers and community allies alike, is paramount to making sure a merger or sale in the future considers workers' voices and needs. Our coalition of unions will continue working to protect our members and our communities from the harmful impacts of this proposed mega merger of Kroger and Albertsons. We have been through mergers and divestitures with private equity ownership before. They never turn out well for our members or communities. Many of you on the call have already gone through a merger and know firsthand the effects. These transactions can be complicated. These companies have and will use underhanded financial tactics to rob the company of as much money as they can. We have jobs, hours, pensions, and a long list of issues that need to be addressed. We will demand a seat at the table with these companies to discuss this merger. We believe that a member bargaining committee should also be involved so the companies can hear directly from their workers. As in any negotiations, we need to understand the financial complexities of these companies and what we are getting into. Today, we will hear from an expert chartered financial analyst who has been tracking these companies for years and studying the structure of this deal as the information becomes available. He is John Marshall, Director of Capital Strategies for Local 3000 in Washington and advisor to the president of Local 324 in Southern California. John will review the latest information we have on Kroger and Albertsons as a result of the member and legal actions we have taken. We will need even more member engagement in the days ahead if we are to win a seat at the bargaining table with these companies as they seek this merger. I hope the information provided tonight encourages you to get involved. Thank you for all you do, and thank you for your participation tonight. I'll hand it back to Joe now.
Thank you, Andrea, and thank you for all of your leadership on this issue. Before we bring on John, I want to tee up once again how folks can participate in this call. I see lots of questions already coming into the Q&A. I would love for people to keep asking questions. I was remiss in not saying, if you could say in your question what local you're from. So if we don't get to your question, we have a way to get back with folks, that we have most folks' first and last names so we can find you, because we do want to make sure we answer all the questions. But if you just type in that question right in the Q&A, once again, at the bottom of your screen, or if you're on a tablet or phone, hit that More tab with 3 dots and you can ask your question there. We'll make sure to answer all those questions. We're also going to be doing a survey at the end of the call, so make sure that folks stay on the line for that. And with that, please let the questions come in. If you see something in John's presentation that raises a question for you, make sure you ask it, and we're going to get to some great questions tonight because I already see them filling up the Q&A. And with that, I'll turn it over to John Marshall. Thank you, John.
Great. Thank you, Joe. I really appreciate that introduction, and Andrea as well. I'm going to go ahead and start to share my screen if I can. I think I need to have my screen sharing enabled. Okay. Can somebody help me be able to share my slides on my screen? Let's see.
You should be good now.
Good now. Okay, here we go. All right. Well, it is definitely an honor to be here with everyone tonight. I saw that there were about 700 people already in the room. And so it is my honor and privilege to be with you for about 20 minutes or so. I plan to go through some of the key points of information about the proposed merger of Kroger and Albertsons. And this merger, let's just be clear, if it's allowed to go forward, would be the largest merger in the history of the supermarket industry. And it would have significant consequences, obviously, for both consumers and workers. I want to discuss that impact and also talk about the reasons behind this merger. And really, if you don't take away anything else from what I'm going to say, I have 2 main takeaways that I want to convey tonight. First, it's very clear that this merger would harm both consumers and workers. The Federal Trade Commission, the FTC, which is the government agency in charge of overseeing mergers like this, has shown that mergers in geographic areas where a small number of companies already have large market shares lead to higher prices for consumers. It's just as simple as that. And we know that there are many markets around the United States where Kroger and Albertsons are the #1 and #2 market leaders. Another important impact would be on workers. Researchers from Columbia University and the University of Chicago have shown that when large employers dominate the labor market in a region, they use that power to lower wages. The second main message that I want to leave you with is that this merger is not about these 2 companies growing bigger and stronger so that they can compete with Amazon or Walmart. It's about increasing profits. Kroger, for its part, sees an opportunity to expand its footprint and in particular, its e-commerce business and to generate profits by selling digital advertising. This strategy would replace a large amount of store-based sales with e-commerce sales and will require fewer workers in stores. It's also a strategy that is targeted at higher income customers and would leave many communities without access to grocery stores they currently have. In the case of Albertsons, the motivation is even clearer. A small number of big private equity firms, including Cerberus and Apollo, have pulled billions of dollars out of this company, and now they want billions more. That created a crisis for Albertsons, and it led directly to this proposed merger so they could get bought out. We clearly saw this motivation last month when the company paid out a $4 billion special dividend. We opposed that, as Andrea referenced, and while we weren't able to stop it, we were able to delay it for a couple of months in court. Even though we didn't stop it, the court challenge allowed us to get a peek inside the merger and learn a tremendous amount about their plans. We also forced them to make a number of important verbal commitments under oath. So, as I said, so many of you have joined us from all over the country, and it's really impressive. And there's folks from 7 states in the District of Columbia on tonight. That's very inspiring. And I think it's a sign of the unity and the solidarity that we will need to confront this merger. At the same time, it's also a sign of just how big this proposed merger is. So this is obviously a map of the United States with Kroger stores highlighted in blue and Albertsons stores highlighted in gold. In fact, there are actually many more stores than these dots. In reality, there are nearly 5,000 Kroger and Albertsons stores in the US. And as you know, in many parts of the country, there are Kroger and Albertsons stores, not just in the same area, but literally across the street from each other. In cities like Phoenix, Seattle, Tacoma, Las Vegas, and Denver, the two companies control over 40% of the entire metropolitan area's grocery market. So this analysis actually understates how much the two companies dominate these and other markets. That's why the Federal Trade Commission is analyzing smaller areas of these cities where the people who live there actually shop. In cities specifically, the FTC considers stores that are located within 2.5 miles of each other as direct competitors. And so a merger of stores within that distance would be considered a reduction in competition. So that's the size that the FTC looks at, and that's the same size of area that we, the UFCW locals that organize this meeting, are analyzing as well. This is a map of Long Beach and Anaheim in Southern California. The red pins are Kroger stores and the blue pins are Albertsons stores. In this area, there are 61 Kroger stores represented by Local 324, and 54 of them, 88%, are within 2.5 miles of at least one Albertsons stores. A little farther to the north of here, there are 138 Kroger stores represented by Local 770, and 80% of those Kroger stores are within 2.5 miles of at least one Albertsons stores. From the FTC's perspective and from the state attorney general's perspective, the proposed merger would clearly give the combined company too much power and have a very negative impact on consumers and workers in these areas. And that's why many observers doubt that this merger will be approved. Last week, the New York Times article quoted an expert saying that there was only a 35% chance the merger would be allowed to go forward. But we expect the companies to appeal these decisions in court. They will claim that the merger won't be a problem because the companies will sell some stores to other competitors. Let's take a closer look at what they're planning to do here. So right now, Kroger has about 2,800 stores and Albertsons has about 2,200 stores. So together, 5,000 stores. The regulators say that's too much. So the companies will offer to sell some stores. In this example, they sell 10% of their combined total, 500 stores. But what if they can't find other companies to buy 500 stores? What if they only find buyers for 250 stores? In that scenario, the companies say they will create a new company called SpinCo that will spin off from the other two companies. SpinCo would take the stores that weren't sold and which have to be divested from the company in order to have the merger approved. But the FTC and the state attorneys general may say that 500 stores isn't enough, and that they think that more stores would need to be sold in order to achieve an appropriate level of competition. According to the merger agreement between Kroger and Albertsons, there's a maximum of 650 stores total that can be sold before Kroger has the right to walk away from the deal. This could happen. The FTC could insist on more than 650 stores being divested. For us, obviously, the sale of these stores is extremely concerning. Who would buy the stores? Would they be able to operate them successfully over the long term? How would this company or these companies approach negotiations with the unions? Most of us remember very well what happened when Albertsons acquired Safeway in 2015. And that's something we don't want to repeat here. When Albertsons acquired Safeway, there were similar antitrust concerns in many areas. So the Federal Trade Commission required Albertsons to sell 168 stores, the vast majority of which, 146, were sold to Hagen. At the time of the sale, Hagen was a relatively small chain of 18 stores in the Pacific Northwest, and it was backed by a private equity firm called Comvest. Very soon after being transferred to Hagen, the former Safeway stores began to experience operational problems and declines in sales. Within 6 months, Hagen would file for bankruptcy. It was called the fastest bankruptcy in modern history. Eventually, Albertsons bought back 50 of the stores it had sold to Hagen, but about 100 of the Hagen stores closed for good. In a lawsuit, Hagen claimed Albertsons had undermined those stores from the start, using confidential information to lure customers away, giving Hagen bad inventory data, removing store fixtures, and failing to maintain the stores in good condition prior to the transfer. Again, this is exactly the kind of scenario we are trying to avoid, and why we're not only opposed to this merger, but communicating very clearly with the state and federal regulators that any divestitures must only be made to qualified buyers that have adequate resources and capacity to sustain these stores and operate them into the future. And again, as Joe and Andrea mentioned, we have a survey that will launch in your browser after this webinar. Please take a moment to fill it out. It will help us follow what's happening in the stores. I want to pause at this point and ask the following question. Why is this happening now? Given all the antitrust concerns about the impact of this merger, the risks of another Hagen disaster, why are the companies proposing this merger? Publicly, we know what they're saying. It's about Walmart and competing with Amazon. But based on the documents filed in the Washington State case, we know this proposal is happening because the shareholders want to get more cash out of these companies. And the huge profits these companies have made during COVID are a big motivation for that. As you know very well, because you've been in the stores, sales increased dramatically under COVID. Prior to the COVID pandemic, sales would typically grow by 1% or 2% per year. But over the last 2.5 years, sales at Kroger have grown by nearly 20%, and sales at Albertsons have grown by nearly 23%. This is translated into huge increases in profits, a 67% increase at Kroger and a nearly 150% increase in profits at Albertsons. This is equivalent to 10 years of growth in profit in just 2.5 years. For Kroger, This merger means doubling down on their strategy to dramatically expand e-commerce, both store pickup and home delivery. Online sales are less profitable than regular store sales, but Kroger believes that by expanding digital sales, they'll be able to grow profitable advertising revenue through their Kroger Precision Media subsidiary. Kroger has a plan to reduce the cost of fulfilling online orders as well by doing two things. One, automating the picking and packing of most orders through their partnership with Ocado, the robotics firm. And two, outsourcing in-store picking and delivery to third-party gig companies like Instacart. I think it's important to understand how the Ocado strategy is connected to the proposed merger. Currently, e-commerce and grocery looks like this. Food products come to the distribution centers, then to the stores, then to the customers' homes for delivery, or customers buy groceries online and pick them up at the stores. But under the Ocado model, the stores are completely cut out of the loop. Food comes into centralized fulfillment centers, robots do the picking, then trucks deliver completed orders directly to consumers' homes. But serious questions remain about whether this will work. It's going much more slowly than Kroger had said. And one of the main problems is that this centralized model requires huge volumes of orders to be efficient, both in terms of the picking and packing, as well as the distribution. So Kroger needs to bring in more customers and more order volume in the same markets where these large facilities are located. If this works, they will eventually have fewer stores for every dollar of sales. That's their strategy. They've articulated it very, very clearly. Obviously, this would have significant implications of workers in the stores, but it also, as I said, has implications for consumers as well. Many customers want to continue to have stores in their communities, not just home delivery. And we know e-commerce customers don't represent an equal cross-section of all consumers. They are, in general, higher income consumers. According to a Gallup survey last year, high-income households were twice as likely as lower-income households to order groceries online. And this fits with the plans of Kroger to make money advertising to this elite consumer segment. This is another way that this merger would harm both workers and communities, and it's driven by a push by Kroger to increase profits. So what about Albertsons? How is it profiting from this merger? Actually, as I said, Albertsons private equity owner's decision to pull billions of cash out of the company starting a little over a year ago led directly to this merger proposal. And frankly, it's the reason that we are all here tonight. Albertsons, like Kroger, has stock that is publicly traded on the New York Stock Exchange. But there's a very important difference about Albertsons stockholders. A very small group of them control the vast majority of the company. This list here shows that in 2021, Albertsons' top 5 shareholders controlled over 80% of the company. This was a problem for Albertsons because it meant that if these large owners all tried to sell their shares at the same time, they would flood the market and crash the stock price. That's why all of these large stockholders entered into lockup agreements when the company first started trading publicly in June of 2020. The lockup agreements meant that they couldn't sell their shares, but those lockup agreements began to expire at the end of 2021. And that's when the second largest of these shareholders, a private equity firm called Apollo, began selling all of its Albertsons shares. This is a chart showing Albertsons stock price beginning in June of 2020 when they IPO'd, and it goes through to the beginning of 2022. What we see here is that the stock starts trading at about $15 a share in 2020. But then as the company's sales and profits continue to grow during 2021, the stock climbs up above $36 per share, a huge increase in just a year and a half. But that's when Apollo begins selling its shares of Albertsons stock. And here you can see ACI is the ticker symbol for Albertsons stock. The stock price immediately falls 20% and continues to decline to below $25 a share prior to the merger announcement. Why am I talking about Albertsons stock price when this is supposed to be a discussion about the merger with Kroger? Because this decline in Albertsons stock price and the impatience of the other large private owners to sell their own shares the same way Apollo did created this crisis for the company's management and leadership. And their solution to this crisis was to find another company to buy them out. We know this because our effort to challenge the payment of the $4 billion special dividend, we were able to get internal documents from Albertsons management in which they discussed this. Those documents, which were disclosed in court, are very clear. They don't talk about Walmart or Amazon. They talk about finding someone else to come and buy all the shares of their private equity owners. Speaking of Albertsons management, you might want to know what's in it for them. Well, they do own some shares of Albertsons. That's true. But last week, the company filed documents that show that Albertsons executives stand to get huge payouts, so-called golden parachutes, if the merger happens. Together, the top 4 executives at the company will receive over $100 million just for being there when the merger happens. The CEO, Vivek Shankaran, will get over $43 million. Just think about that. It would take the average Albertsons employee 1,355 years to make that much money. How long has Mr. Shankaran been at Albertsons? 4 years. The CFO, Sharon McCollum, she's getting over $18 million just for being there when the merger happens. Do you know how long she's been with the company? 1.5 years. It's hard to avoid the feeling that some people are trying to loot this company. This is a company that needs investment. This is a company that has underfunded pension plans. This is a company that may face challenges if there's a recession. And that's why these payouts, the $4 billion dividend, and this whole merger proposal is a reckless use of company resources. So again, I have 2 main messages. Obviously, this proposed merger is not designed to improve competition with Walmart or Amazon. It's a result of the financialization of the supermarket industry, the dominance of this industry by big Wall Street investors. Obviously, it's also going to potentially harm workers and consumers, but that potential harm creates a strong alignment of interests and creates a potentially powerful coalition. It's been my honor to share this information with you. I look forward to hearing what questions you have. And I also want to remind you to please fill out the survey that comes into your browser at the end of this webinar. You all are the eyes and the ears inside the stores, and your perspective is what's going to allow us to stay one step ahead of the companies. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John, for that wonderful information. And I see lots of questions coming into the Q&A. William, I don't know what local William's from, but he says, we need this guy for negotiating our contracts in the Q&A. So, John, I think your services are going to be requested. I should have said, I see this question coming in a lot, and I should have said earlier, each local will get a copy of this recording. That's why we're recording this webinar, and we'll be putting it out on their various platforms, website, social medias, what have you. So folks don't need to be taking pictures of every slide, though you may want those too. But we're going to make sure to share this out because we know that not everyone could be on the webinar tonight. So we have lots of questions coming in. So unless there's anything else from the panel, I'd love to just jump right into questions because we have many, many questions here. Okay, great. I'm going to go first to Terry Mills. I don't know what local Terry's from, but Terry's asking, if there is a merger, how much can we lose in our pension? And John, maybe you want to kick that question off. I know we have lots of pension experts on the call here.
We do. We certainly have more experts than me, but I will say This was one of the really important things that we got some insight into through the court filings in Washington State. Now, the companies have taken sort of an odd position publicly, which is that the multi-employer pension plan liabilities are not their liabilities. They don't officially include it on their balance sheets as debt. But they say, well, maybe at some point, if there's a withdrawal liability, then we'll talk about it. But the documents that we saw from Kroger to Albertsons were very clear. Kroger told Albertsons that unfunded liability is debt. It's going to reduce the amount that we pay you for your company. And that's gold from our perspective. We're going to hold them to that. Whatever happens, they have acknowledged that that is a debt that's attached to those companies.
Do any of the presidents want to talk about how they view this as like a trustee level on these trusts that we all serve on?
Yeah, I can answer some of that. I can tell you that Kim Cordova, I'm the president of Local 7 for Colorado and Wyoming. We've had our pension actuaries look at this really closely, and we've been putting together some models. So for my members that are on the call, many of our stores are in each other's parking lots right across the street from each other, and we expect that there will be significant store closures. We had one model, several models done, but even if we lose 1,000 workers, 1,000 members, that will throw our pension fund into the red zone, which would immediately trigger the need to reduce benefits. And we just ratified our agreement. And so we're obviously concerned about this. If we lose members, there's less people that are coming or that are working, and there's less contributions coming into those pension plans. And this will, could potentially result in significant harm to the health of our plans. And I believe most of the local unions here will suffer the same.
Yeah, and just for this is Kathy Finn from 770, but for Southern California, our fund is in the red zone, where we have a rehabilitation plan and have been working very hard to get out of the red zone. And in fact, one of the things that was agreed to in our last agreement that we just reached at the beginning of 2022 was to apply for some money from the federal government. And the federal government was going to help our pension fund out by putting in, I don't remember the amount, but it's a huge amount of money to help us get out of the red zone. And it's kind of ridiculous based on what the report from John Marshall, that they are taking, billions of dollars out of the company to give it to shareholders, rather than taking any of that money and putting it into our pension fund. At the same time, they're asking the government to put money into our pension fund to restore it to the green zone. So this $4 billion and this other billions of dollars that are going to shareholders as a result of this is money that your hard work has earned and should be taken and put into, there's a lot of things that could be put into. It could be put in making the stores safer, better staffing, better pay, but particularly to fully fund all the pensions before it's taken out and given to shareholders.
Thank you, folks. And I see that there were a few questions on here around the pension security, and obviously that's a huge issue that we'll continue to look into. I'm trying to look at these questions for like general themes, and one thing that I want to address is a lot of the frustration right now with Kroger over the payroll issues. We have a question from Oscar, Local 7, Christy with Local 400, and Ray Bennett, who I know I've met down at Local 367. I'm going to read the way that Ray phrased it, but this is answering a lot of questions about this payroll issue. He writes, how can Kroger go ahead with the merger when there is still members and non-members not getting paid for their work done? Some for 2 months, causing credit ratings to tank, bank fees for checks not being deposited when they should be.
Yeah, Joe, I can respond since that was Ray. We've been fighting the payroll issues for several months. I think going back to October, we ended up leafleting right before Christmas, and we tied it in with the merger. How can they be screwing up everyone's payroll? We had a member not get paid for 4 weeks. and had to take a job at ClickList in order to pay her bills. And her husband was on diabetic medication, other things. So we've been fighting this. I am happy to say that for the most part, the issues have been resolved through all the actions that we've been taking. We still have some issues out there, but I think most of them have been resolved at this point.
One thing I'll add, John Marshall had a very good point about if you merge these two big companies and they have more power to make more mistakes, the risk that is for our members. And I don't know if John wanted to say anything about just the magnification of risk that occurs in a mega merger.
Yeah, absolutely. I was gonna make that exact point. When you have a merger of this size, there's huge, in the business world, they call it integration risk. The ability to actually combine different technology systems, different divisional structures. There's a whole set of challenges just about making these two organizations work together. When you have Kroger that already has these kinds of challenges with their IT system, and then you bring in a whole new system to try to combine that together, there's a huge chance that if this merger is allowed to go forward, it could just not work. Kroger could end up a few years down the road having to sell back a bunch of stores or divisions to other entities, maybe even Cerberus again. So there's all kinds of reasons to slow this down and say, what's really, going to be the result of this.
Thank you, John. Yeah, so we have lots of questions about how oh, sorry, Mark, I see your hands up. Go ahead, Mark.
Well, good evening, everybody. I hope you can hear me okay. It's good to see my sisters and brothers from the West Coast. I do exist out here. I know we haven't talked for a while. I wanted to answer Christy's question. Hi, Christy. It's just saw you Sunday. Look, first of all, the payroll issues are astronomically ridiculous. And it begs the question, and I think it's a good question. If Kroger can't pay its people straight, then what do they have business doing trying to acquire a larger or another chain? We certainly are talking about that in relation to our opposition to the merger. But the merger, at least as far as Local 400 is concerned, the merger has that discussion has nothing to do with us pursuing the fact that people need to be paid. People need to be paid correctly. Echoing the brothers' sentiment, we've had members go 4 weeks without being paid, 5 weeks without being paid, 3 weeks without being paid. We've had health and welfare deductions doubled or not paid at all. The company tries to pay them back, and this is all Kroger related. And then they want to take taxes out of people's refunds for their overpayment on health and welfare. So, I mean, all that begs the question as if they don't have the wherewithal, the resources to simply pay people correctly for the work that they do, which, hello, is the idea why we all go to work, then they should have no business trying to engage in this merger. But so we're certainly using and talking about the payroll issues in regards to the irresponsibility of Kroger not paying their people correctly. But I would just say, and as much as I am really happy to be on this call, this is going to be a long, hard struggle, and we really need to play the long game here. And certainly, the involvement of our members is going to be absolutely tantamount. And the stakes are very, very high. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak. I'd want to say hello to all the Local 400 members that are certainly clued in tonight and really tickled to participate in the call. And, hi, everybody. I'm still out here, so thanks.
Thank you, Mark. And we appreciate that our East Coast siblings on the call are doing this much later than those of us on the West Coast. So thanks for staying up late for the call too. So a few folks, John, asked the question here, Elias has, and a few others, that now that this special dividend has gone out, is Albertsons going to be bankrupt? Do we still have a foothold to fight this merger? So curious your thoughts on that.
Well, I mean, clearly we have a more than a foothold to fight the merger. it would have been much better if the company had kept those resources inside the company and invested in the stores, invested in, the underfunded pension plans and a whole list of things that we could come up with right now. The reality is, if they continue to perform well, then they'll be able to build back their cash reserves. They'll be able to pay down the debt that they're taking out in order to pay out this dividend. But we don't know that. As I said, there could be a recession this year. There could be a serious set of challenges that we can't predict at this point. Hopefully that won't happen. Hopefully the company will continue to perform well because of our members, you on this call right now, serving customers every day and making profit for that company, right? If that continues, the company will be okay. If something happens, they will regret having paid out that $4 billion, and we will certainly say we told them so.
Thank you, John. So Anders with Local 7 wants to know, what's the best way to make our voice heard with the FTC?
So a couple of things. Hi, and thank you for the question from Local 7. We are setting up a landing page where we'll be having some petitions, where we are meeting with faith leaders, community leaders, farmers, ranchers, other labor unions around the country. We will be doing social media, sharing it on your social media. I did see one of the questions online was, can I share the content? Yes, we encourage you to do so. We'll also be sending this out to the members that were not able to participate. But we will be reaching out to some of our members around the country again to continue to talk during whenever the FTC allows for open comments. And like I said, we did have folks go up to DC, and I expect that we're going to be doing more actions as this process goes through. But talking to your coworkers, staying informed is really important. Reach out to your union reps. Again, watch our website, look at your own local website, and we'll be sending out some more direction to how our members participate.
Thank you. And I'm curious, Todd or John, are there points when the FTC will open it up for public comment, and is that a step in the process?
It is. I mean, I know some members have already been engaging with the FTC and already been providing public comment. As Kim was just saying, we think it's going to be effective. I mean, there's no reason why people can't do that already. We want to organize people to do it collectively. And so we're in the process of setting up that landing page so we can do just that. But right now, there is the ability to go ahead and comment at the FTC's website.
So we have a few folks asking a version of this question. I'm curious your thoughts on it. So Amanda, I don't know what local she's from. She's saying, would it be better if a different company took over Albertsons? Wouldn't that have a bigger effect on us? And Andrew asked if there's any benefits to the merger. Is it only negative outcomes? And is there a scarier prospect we should be worried about? And I don't know, John, or if one of the presidents wants to take that, I'll turn it over to you all.
Well, I can start, and then maybe somebody else wants to chime in. Look, we have to be realistic, right? We are swimming with sharks to some extent. The companies that have billions of dollars to buy other companies tend not to be the friend of workers, right? And that's just the reality of it. Now, as we've already discussed, there are some real concerns about Kroger doing this, both because they may not be able to do it successfully. If folks remember, SuperValue back in 2006 tried to do another very large merger, and it went badly. And a couple of years later, they were selling thousands of stores to Cerberus and other people. That's a very serious risk. But the reality is, Cerberus and Apollo and the other private equity folks that own Albertsons have already made back what they invested many times over. If we can stop this merger and get them to slowly divest their shares over time, they'll be just fine, and Albertsons will be just fine. There's nothing the matter with that scenario.
I just want to say to this question, we've heard from people that Albertsons is for sale one way or the other. They're going to sell somehow, whether it's to Kroger or someone else, and maybe Kroger is the lesser of two evils. But I will say, depending on what part of the country you're in, makes a big difference. So in those areas that on that map that John showed in his presentation, where there's a lot of overlap, like the Pacific Northwest, Southern California, Arizona, some parts of the East Coast, the Chicago area, Colorado, and I may be missing some, I hope I'm not, but in those areas where there's considerable overlap between Albertsons stores and Kroger stores, that's where there's a real risk of lots of divestitures and either a Hagen type situation or a situation where there's not buyers for those stores. And there is a real risk of lots of store closures and lots of job losses. For somebody who's in an area where there's not a lot of overlap, it may not matter as much as to whether the buyer of Albertsons is Kroger or some other company. But for those folks who are in those areas with a lot of overlap, it makes a big difference. And if Albertsons is going to sell no matter what, almost any buyer would be better than Kroger as a buyer. At least that's my opinion.
And I'd like to comment on that too. In 2014 and 2015, when Albertsons and Safeway were bought by Sybaris, in Colorado and Wyoming, we had more than 43 stores close. In Wyoming, they divested some of the stores, and what they did is they sold the rights to the workers as well as the property of the store. So in Wyoming, workers were not allowed to transfer into another union store. Their name was given by the company not to pick up any Safeway Albertsons would not rehire, transfer any of those workers that were in the stores that were divested to another company. And then you look at in Colorado, it created food deserts where they closed stores. We had people that lived where the closest store to them was 45 miles or further away, in some cases hundreds of miles, where you just couldn't transfer or bump over there. But there's other things that this affects, not just our pension, our health, but when you have one major unionized employer like we would have in Colorado, if you merge Safeway, Albertsons, because they run under the same banner, and you have Kroger merged together, when you go to negotiations, you lose your leverage. You are not able to use and leverage your power with separate companies against each other. We just had a major strike last year in January of 2022, and we were able to get industry leading contracts because we were able to leverage the two companies against each other. Having them as one, you lose a lot of that bargaining power, but we will, most of the locals on this call have stores that are all overlapping. There's over 100,000 workers that are represented by the local unions that are in this coalition that are all going to see the negative impact with this merger. So I agree with Kathy. There is a lot to this merger that is really bad for workers and consumers.
Yeah. And I think one of the questions was like, why aren't more of the locals opposing? And I think that's our job. We're going to have to go out and make the case for why we should oppose. And, I think the boogeyman in the room is, Amazon could buy, or some other terrible non-union employer could buy. Well, there are lots of reasons it is not good for Kroger and Albertsons to be merging. And we have to set those fear things aside and figure those out as they come towards us. So I think and I think there's these chains that are maybe completely non-union in Texas or in other places. And I think there's some promise being made or some consideration being given that, those could become union. And so there could actually be growth if we allowed Kroger and Albertsons to merge. So I think those are some of the things that are going on where we need to go out and talk to folks, members on this call, talk to other members, and really help make sure people understand why this merger is not a good thing for any of us.
I do want to make one quick comment so we can move on to more questions, but in the situation in Colorado and Wyoming, when they were closing stores, they were closing the union stores and keeping the non-union stores open. And we see where there's overlap. There may be a union store within 2.5 miles of a non-union store. And what we have experienced is that they will keep the non-union store and shut down the union store. And so that's another big problem with these two companies merging. Gives them an excuse and a path to be union free.
Kim, I think that's a great segue to our next question. We have about 5 minutes left. I want to make sure we get folks out on time. We still have hundreds and hundreds of people on the call. So I appreciate folks want to hear the answers to these questions. So I want to do a little speed round. We have 770. We have Alexis and Clara are both asking about rumors in the store, things that they're hearing. I'm sorry, not Alexis, Ivan and Clara. Clara says that she heard that all the Food for Lesses are going to close. Ivan saying there's a bread vendor saying that their store is going to close down. How do you, Kathy, in 770, recommend the folks kind of deal with these rumors that are going to start floating around?
So I always tell people, don't believe rumors that you hear. One thing about the Food for Less stores, we've heard rumors always over years and years and years that they're going to close Food for Less. But the reality is, and John Marshall can speak to this, I think Food for Less is one of the most profitable chains that Kroger owns. And John Marshall has done the research, and that is definitely the case. I don't think that there's any risk that the Food for Less as a chain is going to close, but there certainly is a huge risk that some stores will close if this merger goes through. So nobody yet knows as of today which stores, and we've asked this question, we've requested information about which stores are the potentially targeted stores for either sale or closing, and that information has not been released. It's proprietary information. So I am telling you, the bread vendor doesn't know, the store manager doesn't know, the Teamster who's delivering stuff doesn't know. So if people are telling you they've heard that your store or some particular store or some part of the chain is going to close, they don't know. These are rumors, and generally rumors are just as likely to be untrue as true, probably more likely to be untrue than true. So don't believe rumors. When we have information, we will share it. We're not holding back any information from folks. So when there is information available that is of use to you, we will share it. Any information you're hearing about store closures right now is just most likely not true.
Thank you, Kathy. Leanna with 367 recommends that we send the slide presentations that John has to the FTC. I think that's a great idea. You don't need to answer that. I just want to throw that in there. And then
one thing about that is we do have lawyers and researchers, including John Marshall and others, who are working to prepare presentations for attorney generals and the FTC, which will include a lot of the information that John had, but as well as a lot of other information that the FTC will rely upon to make their decision.
Thank you. Now to Alexis. I jumped the gun on that with Local 5 in Northern California wants to know, when are we going to do outreach to our communities like flyers and talking to actual customers? Many don't know anything about this. So John, I don't know if you want to, John with Local 5, if you want to jump in.
Sure. Thank you, Joe. And hello, Alexis. I look forward to seeing you at 1:30 tomorrow as we have a meeting. I will be talking with you more about there. We're actually developing a number of things. And the first things are like the meeting that we had last week with different community groups. I think we've been talking about to really find our allies out there in the community, because there's lots of them. And especially with a coalition like that, I was quite amazed in the call we had last week. It was a lot of folks getting together. We've also started having some staff coordinate with our labor councils to find more of these community groups. And then part of this Stop the Merger group is then going to be moving forward with some activities for you to get involved with, even up there here on the North Coast in California. So thanks for the question.
Thanks, John. I'm going to go last question, Tamerly with Local 3000. When will we know if this merger does go through? And I would like to help. What can I do?
So I could take that so that we can, when we get the slides, share it. There's a survey at the end. We need everybody to fill that out. There's a website that's going to launch for our community partners. There are going to be joint events. All of the locals on this call have been meeting weekly to talk about what needs to happen and how to do that. There may be a time where we have to go testify in DC or locally. So there will be a whole host of actions we can take together. And we're going to be keeping folks as updated as possible. And if people like this setting too, where you're getting a lot of education, we can probably add some education ongoing as we move through this process. So this has been wonderful to see everybody. And this is a strong coalition, and we have stuck together through thick and thin, and we're going to continue to work together.
And with
And just
that-
with respect to the, can I just say one, with respect to the part of the question about when we will know if it goes through, the timeline is about a year. So they didn't expect it to go through till the beginning of 2024 anyway. So we have about a year to fight this.
Thank you. With that, I'll turn it over to Andrea to wrap things up.
Yeah, great questions. I mean, I think the engagement we got tonight is just the start, and we need to continue talking to your siblings in the store, your fellow union members. As Faye said, we're growing in the number of local unions that are in our coalition. We're sending out you'll get a survey when you end this meeting tonight. Really, we need your stories. We need your thoughts on it, because that's the kind of information that the regulators want to hear and that the communities need to hear. So thank you so much for taking the time tonight. We will continue to communicate with you through your local unions and through future seminars such as this, because I think it really has been an eye-opener. Your questions have been very, very relevant and on point, and we're thrilled that we've had the opportunity to see you tonight. So thank you very much, everybody. Fill out the survey and have a great night.
Bye.
Everyone.